Get your goddamn hands off my property! The words, dripping with ice and venom, sliced through the hum of champagne-fueled chatter like a shard of glass. Isabella Hawthorne, heiress to the Hawthorne global pharmaceutical empire, materialized between Leo Martinez and the immaculate Fazioli concert grand piano. Her five-figure couture gown shimmered under the ballroom's crystal chandeliers as she shoved his janitorial cart aside, the clatter of cleaning supplies echoing the sudden, dead silence of the room. 200 of New York's most powerful people turned as one, their faces a gallery of morbid curiosity. Leo froze, the string mop in his hands still dripping gray water onto a priceless Persian rug. What would you do in that moment? When your very existence is called into question, treated as a contagion in a world you only get to clean? Drop a comment below. I want to know your gut reaction. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of what happens next. Isabella's Arctic blue eyes, the color of a frozen sky, raked over him, cataloging every perceived flaw from his scuffed work boots to the faded gray of his coveralls. "Do you actually believe," she began, her voice a low, theatrical whisper that carried to every corner of the vast room, "that someone like you belongs anywhere near an instrument of this caliber?" Her finger, adorned with a diamond the size of a quail's egg, jabbed accusingly towards the piano. "This instrument, this work of art, costs more than your entire miserable bloodline will ever be worth. Combined." A ripple of cruel, nervous laughter spread through the assembled titans of industry and society mavens. They were her audience, and she was their conductor. Leo's jaw hardened into a line of granite. He could feel the blood pounding in his ears, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence. Then, Isabella, a predator sensing the kill, delivered the final crushing blow. A smirk played on her perfectly sculpted lips. "Tell you what, custodian." She let the word hang in the air, waited with condescension. "You play that piano. Play that Chopin." She gestured to the open sheet music on the stand. "Play it right now, and I'll marry you on this very spot." The room didn't just laugh. It erupted. A wave of brutal, unrestrained amusement washed over him, drowning him. Have you ever been so thoroughly humiliated that your dignity becomes their primetime entertainment? That your soul becomes their spectator sport? The 4:30 a.m. A train rattled and screamed through the subterranean darkness, a steel serpent burrowing its way toward the glittering heart of Manhattan. It carried Leo Martinez and the crushing weight of two jobs, one dying mother, a sister's impossible dream, and a choice that felt less like a crossroads and more like a cliff's edge. His reflection stared back from the grimy, vibrating window, a face chiseled by responsibility long before its time. At 29, Leo looked like a man who had already lived 100 hard lives, a man who had buried his father, raised his sister, and watched his mother's vitality fade one dialysis session at a time. But his hands, resting on the worn leather of his work gloves, told a different story. They were the hands of a ghost, the ghost of the man he was supposed to be. Long, elegant fingers, calloused from industrial chemicals and rough work, yet they rested in a posture of innate grace, a quiet testament to a forgotten strength. "Play that piano, and I'll marry you." Isabella Hawthorne's venomous challenge echoed in the rattling train car, a ghost haunting the space between heartbeats. Her cruel, dismissive laughter had followed him through 18 straight hours of mopping floors, scrubbing toilets, and pretending her words hadn't carved themselves into his chest like graffiti on a subway wall. His phone vibrated, a faint buzz against his thigh. A text from his sister, Sophia. Mom's session ran long again. They had to drain extra fluid. Dr. Evans wants to talk about the experimental treatment. The experimental treatment. $75,000. A number so vast, so astronomically out of reach, it might as well have been 75 million. It was the price of a miracle, a currency they didn't possess. The train shrieked into his station, the sound of metal grinding on metal, a perfect symphony for his frayed nerves. Leo shouldered his worn backpack, the straps digging into his shoulders, and ascended the concrete steps toward street level. He emerged into the pre-dawn glow of a city that never slept, where the towers of Manhattan pierced the bruised purple sky like golden needles, threading wealth through the clouds, far above the world he inhabited. By 5:15 a.m., he was pushing his mop across the marble lobby of the Olympus Club, a private sanctuary on Fifth Avenue, where Isabella Hawthorne's monthly membership fee was more than he earned in a year. The Olympus Club didn't exist in the same reality as the rest of New York. It was a pocket dimension of obscene wealth. The air smelled of antique leather, expensive perfume, and the quiet, confident hum of generational power. Priceless oil paintings older than the United States Constitution hung on walls paneled with wood from extinct trees. The members here didn't talk about money. They spoke in stock tickers and measured time in quarterly earnings reports. Leo moved through this gilded world like a phantom. Present but unseen, essential but unacknowledged. He had mastered the art of invisibility over 7 long, grinding years. 7 years since the day he'd walked away from a full scholarship to Juilliard. 7 years since professors had whispered the word prodigy when he walked by. The acceptance letter, thick with promise and prestige, had arrived in the mail 3 days after they had lowered his father's casket into the ground in the Bronx. His father, a construction worker, had fallen from a scaffold, the safety harness faulty, the company's lawyers quicker than the ambulance. Leo, his father had whispered in the hospital, his lungs thick with construction dust and the metallic tang of blood. Promise me. Take care of your mother. Take care of Sophia. Leo had promised. And in that moment, the hallowed halls of Juilliard had crumbled into dust, replaced by the grim reality of hospital bills and rent checks. Now, at 6 a.m., Leo pushed his cart past the club's grand music room. Through the beveled glass of the double doors, the Fazioli piano sat like a sleeping black panther, its polished ebony surface gleaming with latent power. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor lay open on the music stand, the very piece Isabella had used as a weapon, the same piece he had performed for his final high school recital, earning a thunderous standing ovation from judges who had looked at him as if they'd just discovered a new element. His fingers twitched inside his gloves, a phantom limb of muscle memory stirring from its long slumber. 4 years of intensive theory, 4 years of brutal technique drills, 4 years of his mentor saying, "Leo, you don't just play the notes, you speak a language." But that language didn't pay for dialysis. It didn't cover the rent on their cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights, where his mother slept on a hospital bed that dominated the living room. It didn't keep the lights on so Sophia could study for her pre-med classes at a desk cluttered with scholarships she'd won, but couldn't fully accept. Their world measured exactly 650 square feet, a space that smelled of antiseptic, deferred dreams, and his mother's quiet, uncomplaining pain. On the peeling kitchen wall hung their last family photo, taken at his high school graduation. Leo, beaming in his cap and gown, his arms around his proud parents, Sophia, a bright-eyed freshman beside them, before the fall, before the diagnosis, before life had become a grim calculus of survival instead of a canvas for living. But even in the suffocating darkness, Leo had found a sliver of light, his sanctuary. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, after the cleaning crews at Lincoln Center had finished their official rounds, a security guard named Elijah Jones, a former jazz bassist with hands like gnarled oak roots and a heart of pure gold, would unlock practice room 7B for exactly 2 hours. "Brother," Elijah had said 6 months ago, catching Leo humming a complex Bach fugue while polishing brass fixtures. He'd looked down at Leo's hands. These hands weren't made for mops and chemicals. Those clandestine midnight sessions were the only thing keeping Leo sane. Alone with a beaten-up Baldwin upright, its keys yellowed like old teeth, he would unleash the music that was trapped inside him. He played everything from Bach to Brubeck, Mozart to Monk. His fingers remembered the language his life had forced him to forget. That excellence existed beyond circumstance, that beauty transcended bank accounts. Last Thursday, he'd played Chopin's Ballad No. 1, the same piece Isabella had used to mock him. He'd played it flawlessly, each note precise, each phrase breathing with an emotional depth that 7 years of silence and struggle had only intensified. When he'd finished, his hands trembling with the release, Elijah had been standing in the doorway, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Leo," he'd whispered, his voice thick, "that wasn't playing, son. That was a prayer." But prayers didn't fund experimental treatments. Prayers didn't fix failing kidneys. Prayers didn't silence the insidious voice in Leo's head that whispered he was wasting his God-given talent, one soul-crushing mop stroke at a time. His phone buzzed again. "Sophia. Got into the Columbia Dual program. Pre-med and music comp. Full academic ride, but the music supplement is due Friday. Said if you could just record one piece." Leo stopped mopping, the water sloshing in the bucket. Sophia had inherited their father's brilliant scientific mind and their family's deep, resonant gift for music. But the music supplement for her composition application required a high-quality recording of an original piece, performed by a skilled pianist. Leo was that pianist. He had always been that pianist. But recording meant being seen. Recording meant risk. Recording meant stepping out of the suffocating shadows where survival was predictable, even if it was a living death. He thought of Isabella Hawthorne's words, her face a mask of bored cruelty. "Play this piano and I'll marry you." The challenge wasn't about marriage. It was a power play, a public execution of his dignity. It was a reminder that some spaces, like the gleaming Fazioli, like success, like respect, were not meant for people like him. Leo resumed mopping, but something inside him had shifted. Each stroke of the mop was no longer an act of drudgery, but a deliberate, controlled motion, like a finger exercise on a silent keyboard. Because somewhere between Isabella's casual sadism and Sophia's looming deadline, between his mother's mounting medical bills and his father's dying wish, Leo Martinez was beginning to realize that invisibility wasn't a shield, it was a prison, and maybe, just maybe, it was time for a goddamn jailbreak. The gold watch on his wrist, a simple Seiko his father had worn for 20 years, the only thing he'd inherited, ticked relentlessly toward 7 a.m. Soon, the members would arrive. Soon, Isabella Hawthorne would glide through these opulent halls, her diamonds catching the light, her cruel words echoing in the marble corridors. Soon, Leo would have to make a choice. Remain a ghost, or become a goddamn poltergeist. Isabella Hawthorne arrived at the Olympus Club, not like a person, but like a weather system. Beautiful, devastating, and altering the atmospheric pressure of any room she entered. Her custom midnight blue Rolls-Royce Ghost purred to the curb at precisely 8:47 a.m., 3 minutes ahead of her own internal schedule. She didn't wait for the valet. The world waited for her, not the other way around. Her Christian Louboutin heels, the color of dried blood, clicked against the marble steps with the sharp, metronomic precision of a guillotine. She swept through the club's grand entrance hall as if she held the deed, which, technically, her family's trust did. The Hawthorne name was etched into a brass plaque by the main door, nestled comfortably between Rockefeller and Vanderbilt. This was old money, the kind of obscene wealth that didn't need to shout because its power was a silent, suffocating gravity. "Good morning, Miss Hawthorne," the concierge murmured, his voice steeped in the practiced reverence reserved for gods and billionaires. Isabella offered no reply. Acknowledging service staff was a transaction, and she never made an investment that didn't yield a return. In her world, the people who cleaned the floors and opened the doors were merely part of the infrastructure, as unremarkable as the plumbing or the electricity. Her platinum blonde hair, styled in a severe but elegant chignon, caught the morning light filtering through a massive Tiffany-stained glass window as she moved toward the private elevators. Every detail of her existence was a calculated display of power. The bespoke Alexander McQueen suit that cost more than the concierge's car. The Graf diamond tennis bracelet, a casual constellation of flawless stones on her wrist. The 10-carat canary diamond ring she wore on her right hand, an engagement ring to herself, because the only commitment she trusted was to her own ambition. Trailing in her wake was her usual coterie of acolytes: James Davenport, her chief financial officer, his eyes glued to a tablet displaying pharmaceutical stock reports; Dr. Alistair Finch, the club's resident physician who publicly endorsed her health initiatives; and Amelia Vance, her publicist, a shark in Chanel, documenting every moment for maximum social media engagement. "The wellness gala is already trending, Isabella," Amelia murmured, holding up her phone. "Hawthorne Cares has over 2 million impressions since yesterday's press release." Isabella's smile was as sharp and thin as a surgeon's scalpel. Hawthorne Global had just increased the price of a life-saving insulin drug by 400% last quarter, but tonight's lavish charity gala would rebrand her as a champion of healthcare. The hypocrisy wasn't just delicious, it was profitable. They entered the club's main ballroom, a cavernous space where tonight's performance would unfold. Workers scurried like ants, hanging floral arrangements and adjusting complex lighting rigs. Isabella's Arctic eyes scanned the room with predatory precision, her mind a supercomputer cataloging every potential imperfection. Her gaze landed, and then froze, on the Fazioli concert grand piano positioned center stage. "What is that doing there?" Her voice was laced with the chill of liquid nitrogen. James consulted his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. "The entertainment committee, Ms. Hawthorne. They thought live classical music would elevate the ambiance, add a touch of sophistication." "Sophistication," Isabella repeated the word, rolling it around her mouth like cheap wine she was about to spit out. "And who, precisely, is performing?" James scrolled frantically. "It doesn't specify. I believe it's merely decorative for the cocktail hour." Isabella approached the piano, circling it like a wolf studying a potential threat. The instrument was a masterpiece, a concert grand worth over $250,000. Its polished ebony surface was a black mirror, reflecting the ballroom's glittering crystal chandeliers. The sheet music sat open on the stand. Chopin's Ballade No. 1. She recognized the piece. She'd been forced to butcher it during her mandatory childhood piano lessons at the Spence School. She'd quit after 6 months, declaring the pursuit tedious and utterly irrelevant. Her instructor had diplomatically suggested her talents might lie in other areas. "Ma'am?" A maintenance worker approached her, his steps hesitant, his posture deferential. "Should we move this for the main event tonight?" Isabella's attention snapped to the man, a laser finding its target. He was older, his face lined with a life of hard work, wearing the same gray uniform as the janitor from this morning. The same invisible army that kept her world polished and perfect. "Do you play the piano?" she asked, her tone deceptively neutral. The man blinked, thrown. No, ma'am. Of course you don't. Isabella's laugh was the tinkling of breaking crystal. Silly of me to ask. She ran a manicured finger along the piano's flawless edge, leaving no print, no trace of her presence. But her mind was working, calculating, plotting. Tonight's gala would host 200 of the most influential people in New York City. Senators, pharmaceutical rivals, European aristocrats, tech billionaires. All gathered to applaud her performative generosity while she laid the groundwork for a hostile takeover of a competing biotech firm. The evening needed more than just elegance. It needed a moment, a spectacle, something that would trend beyond Amelia's curated hashtags, something that would be talked about for months, reminding everyone in this room and beyond exactly who wielded the power. Her phone buzzed. A text from her board chairman. Hawthorne stock up 3% on Gala Buzz. Keep the momentum. She smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips. The evening's entertainment had just been finalized. The piano would stay exactly where it was. Amelia, she called, not bothering to turn around. Make sure your team has optimal camera positioning around this piano, all angles. I have a feeling tonight's gala is going to be unforgettable. As Isabella continued her inspection of the ballroom, Leo Martinez pushed his cleaning cart past the service entrance. Through the thick glass doors, he saw her. She stood beside the Fazioli, her very presence warping the space around her, transforming it into something between a courtroom and a coliseum. For a fraction of a second, she caught his reflection on the piano's polished black surface. Her head turned slightly, and her arctic blue eyes met his. It lasted no more than 2 seconds, but it was long enough for recognition, long enough for calculation, long enough for Isabella Hawthorne to decide that tonight's blood sport had just found its gladiator. Her smile widened, revealing teeth as white and perfect as pearls. The words she had spoken 12 hours ago had been a rehearsal. Tonight would be the command performance. The Olympus Club's grand ballroom had been transformed into a stage fit for modern royalty. The light from a dozen crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a golden, buttery glow across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. 200 of Manhattan's most powerful figures drifted through the space, their hushed conversations a symphony of influence and ambition. Isabella Hawthorne held court at the center of the room, a vision in a midnight blue Valentino gown that cost more than a 4-year college education. Around her, pharmaceutical CEOs and state senators orbited like planets around a particularly brilliant and dangerous star. The insulin accessibility program has been truly transformative, Isabella, Dr. Finch was saying, raising his champagne flute in a toast. Your leadership proves that profit and compassion can, in fact, coexist beautifully. Isabella's smile could have cut diamonds. Hawthorne Global had tripled the price of insulin while launching a compassionate care program that served exactly 0.3% of affected patients. But tonight wasn't about statistics. It was about narrative. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice amplified by a hidden microphone, cutting smoothly through the ambient chatter. Before our formal program begins, I'd like to address something that has been troubling me. The conversations paused. Phones began to emerge from designer clutches and tuxedo pockets. Isabella Hawthorne being troubled by anything was an event. Earlier today, she continued, her ice-blue eyes sweeping the crowd, expertly building suspense, I made a rather disturbing discovery about the standards we keep here at the Olympus Club. It seems some of our service staff believe they have an appreciation for fine culture. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Senator Morrison whispered to his wife, "Oh, here we go. She's on one tonight." Near the service entrance, Leo was quietly clearing empty glasses, when Isabella's words struck him like a physical blow. He froze, a tray of flutes balanced precariously in his hand. He had hoped to finish his shift as a ghost, to slip away unnoticed. But Isabella Hawthorne had other plans. "Leo," she called out, her voice as sharp and precise as a scalpel. "Would you please join us on stage?" 400 eyes swiveled in his direction. Leo felt the crushing weight of their collective gaze, a physical pressure that made it hard to breathe. He placed the tray on a nearby table and moved forward, his steps steady, his posture erect. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him cower. "This morning," Isabella continued, her voice swelling with theatrical momentum as Leo approached the stage, "I discovered our custodian here, examining our priceless Fazioli concert grand, not cleaning it, mind you, studying it, as if someone of his background could possibly comprehend such artistry." The crowd murmured, a low hum of appreciative condescension. Amelia Vance was already filming, her phone capturing the perfect angle of what was shaping up to be viral gold. Isabella gestured dramatically toward the magnificent piano. "This instrument, ladies and gentlemen, represents the pinnacle of human achievement. It costs more than most people earn in a decade. It requires breeding, training, a lifetime of cultural immersion to even appreciate qualities that—" She let the sentence hang in the air, her gaze moving pointedly from Leo's simple black uniform to his worn work shoes. "But I am feeling generous tonight," she announced, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still managed to reach every corner of the ballroom. "This is, after all, a charity event. So, I will make our friend here a proposition." Leo's hands, though steady at his sides, clenched into tight fists. His knuckles were white. "If this gentleman," she purred, "can play even the opening bars of that Chopin piece." She pointed at the sheet music with a flourish. "I will marry him, right here, right now." The ballroom erupted in a cacophony of delighted, cruel laughter. Someone shouted, "Isabella, you're a savage!" Another voice called out, "The poor guy doesn't stand a chance." With a grand gesture, Isabella reached into her clutch and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside rested the 10-carat canary diamond ring. With theatrical precision, she walked to the piano and placed the ring directly on top of the sheet music. "There's your engagement ring, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with mockery. "All you have to do is earn it." The crowd pressed closer, their bodies forming a semicircle around the stage, a modern-day coliseum hungry for a spectacle. Phones were held high, their lenses like 1,000 unblinking eyes. Someone had already started a live stream. The hashtag, #Hawthorne Gala Drama, was gaining traction. "Of course," Isabella added, her voice syrupy with false sweetness. "When you inevitably fail, I trust you'll understand that some spaces, some objects, some echelons of society are simply not meant for people like you." Dr. Finch chuckled nervously beside her. "Isabella, perhaps this is a bit much." "Oh, but this is an educational moment, Alistair," she interrupted, her eyes gleaming. "We are about to witness a live demonstration of the difference between ambition and ability, between aspiration and breeding." She turned her full, devastating attention back to Leo, her smile a weapon that could freeze champagne. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer to simply return to your duties. No one would blame you for knowing your place." The challenge hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Leo could feel their anticipation, their hunger for his humiliation. Their phones were recording his every micro-expression, their social media algorithms already calculating the viral potential of his failure. And in that moment, standing before New York's elite as they waited to feast on his dignity, he heard a voice from the past, as clear as a bell, the voice of his grandfather. "Dignity isn't something they can take from you, mijo. It's something you either carry or you don't." Isabella's Arctic eyes gleamed with predatory triumph. She had built the perfect cage. Accept and face public annihilation. Decline and confirm every ugly stereotype she had just painted of him. "Well," she prompted, adjusting her graph bracelet with a deliberate, agonizing slowness. "Do we have a groom? Or do we have a janitor who understands his station?" The ballroom held its breath, a collective pause waiting for Leo Martinez to choose between the slow death of invisibility and the swift execution of his pride. The piano waited too, its 88 keys reflecting the ballroom light like a smile full of perfect, silent teeth. Time seemed to slow, stretching like taffy in the suffocatingly silent ballroom. Leo stood in the center of that amphitheater of cruelty, each phone a tiny, unblinking eye poised to record his demise for eternal replay on the internet. The polished marble floor seemed to tilt beneath his feet, a precarious slope leading to either oblivion or something far, far worse. Isabella Hawthorne's canary diamond ring glittered atop the sheet music, a 10-carat monument to mockery. "Tick-tock," Isabella sang softly, a playful, venomous lilt to her voice as she theatrically checked a diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch. "Don't keep your blushing bride waiting, darling." A woman in the front row, draped in what looked like a small fortune in pearls, whispered loudly to her husband. "The poor man probably can't even read music. This is just barbaric." Her husband, a real estate mogul, chuckled. "It's brilliant, darling. Pure power play." Leo's mind was a maelstrom. Viral humiliation, immediate termination from both his jobs, the catastrophic collapse of his family's fragile financial world, his mother's experimental treatment vanishing like a mirage, Sophia's Columbia dream turning to dust. But then, cutting through the roaring static of fear and consequence, a different voice emerged from a memory 20 years old. His grandfather, sitting beside him at a beat-up piano in their cramped Bronx apartment, his large, calloused construction worker's hand gently guiding Leo's small ones. "Mijo, listen to me. They can take your job. They can take your money. They can even try to take your dreams. But they can never, ever take what God put in your fingers and in your heart." His grandfather, who had played piano in the smoky jazz clubs of Harlem in the 50s, before racism and necessity forced him into a life of hard labor. The man who had worked 12-hour construction shifts, and then came home to patiently teach Leo scales by the dim glow of a lamplight, who died believing his grandson was destined to make music that mattered. Leo's hand moved instinctively to his wrist, his fingers brushing against the cool metal of his father's old Seiko watch beneath his uniform cuff. The watch was a simple, honest thing. It didn't tell time in diamonds. It told it in loyalty and legacy. It felt warm against his skin, a tangible link to a promise made to a dying man. He thought of Sophia, so brilliant, so fiercely determined, needing just one recording to unlock a future she had earned 1,000 times over. He thought of his mother, her body failing but her spirit unbowed, facing every agonizing dialysis session with a quiet dignity that shamed everyone in this opulent room. He thought of his father's last words, "Take care of them." And he realized, in a moment of stunning, terrifying clarity, that taking care of them meant more than just paying the bills. It meant showing them that surrender was not in their DNA. It meant proving that being underestimated was not the same as being defeated. Leo raised his head. He looked past the phones, past the smirking faces, and met Isabella Hawthorne's Arctic gaze directly. For the first time in 7 years, he allowed his full height to assert itself. His shoulders, usually rounded from exhaustion and deference, squared. His spine straightened into the regal posture his Juilliard audition panel had noted on his evaluation form. Slowly, Deliberately, he began to pull off his worn work gloves. He folded them with meticulous care, revealing hands that told the dual story of his life: the calluses and scars of survival, and the elegant length and innate grace of an artist. His father's watch caught the chandelier light, the simple gold gleaming against his skin like defiance made manifest. "I accept your proposal, Miss Hawthorne," Leo said. His voice, quiet but resonant, carried a new and startling authority that seemed to alter the very acoustics of the ballroom. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the stammering, cowed response they had been expecting. He started walking towards the piano. Each step was not the shuffle of a janitor, but the measured, confident stride of a performer taking his stage. Each footfall on the priceless rug was a note in the opening measure of a symphony that was about to bring the goddamn house down. Leo approached the Fazioli concert grand not as a janitor, but as a king reclaiming his throne. The ballroom fell utterly silent. This was no longer the polite quiet of social decorum, but the absolute, electric stillness that precedes a lightning strike. 200 of New York's most powerful people held their breath, their phones still raised, but their smirks had been replaced by a tense, uncertain curiosity. Isabella stood beside the piano, a smug prosecutor presenting her final, damning piece of evidence. "Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor," she announced to the crowd, her voice dripping with mock solemnity. "For those of you unfamiliar, it is one of the most technically demanding and emotionally complex pieces in the entire classical repertoire. Even seasoned concert pianists struggle with its intricacies." Her ice-blue eyes locked with Leo's, glittering with predatory satisfaction. "But please," she purred, "do try your best." The crowd pressed in, forming a tight, suffocating amphitheater of expectation. Amelia Vance had repositioned herself to capture both Leo's imminent failure and Isabella's triumphant reaction shot. Janitor Plays Chopin was now trending. Leo reached the piano bench. His simple work boots were silent on the thick Persian rug. For a long moment, he just stood there, his hand hovering inches above the polished ebony finish, taking in the instrument's magnificent presence. This Fazioli was a monument to human genius, a $250,000 fusion of art and engineering. He had dreamed of playing an instrument like this during those stolen, midnight hours at Lincoln Center, hunched over the battered Baldwin with its 3 dead keys and sticky sustain pedal. He had imagined what it would feel like to have 88 perfect, weighted keys responding to his every nuance, his every whisper. Now, surrounded by a hostile audience eagerly anticipating his abject failure, he was about to find out. He sat on the plush leather bench, adjusting its height with the fluid, practiced economy of movement that spoke of thousands of hours spent at a keyboard. His hands hovered over the keys, not touching them, just feeling the resonant energy of the instrument, like the heat from a forge. "This should be good," someone whispered from the crowd. "How long do you think he'll last?" "I'll give him 30 seconds, another voice murmured. $20 says he doesn't even make it past the first page, Senator Morrison muttered to his wife. "You're on," Dr. Finch replied unexpectedly, his eyes narrowed on Leo. "Something about his posture?" Isabella's smile widened. Her trap was perfectly set. The public humiliation, the impossible piece, the guaranteed failure that would not only provide a memorable spectacle, but also reinforce the natural order of her universe. Leo flexed his fingers, a subtle, rippling movement that revealed the elegant architecture of hands born to create music. The calluses from cleaning chemicals couldn't hide their inherent grace. His father's watch gleamed, a quiet promise under the intense lights. He gently tested the piano's action with a few silent depressions of the keys, acquainting himself with the instrument's soul. The Fazioli's touch was exquisite, incredibly responsive, capable of both a thundering fortissimo and the most delicate, ethereal pianissimo. Leo's eyes closed for a brief, centering moment, and when they opened, the shift was profound. The janitor was gone. The ghost had vanished. In his place sat an artist. He took a deep breath that seemed to pull all the sound and oxygen from the room, creating a vacuum of perfect silence. When his fingers finally made contact with the ivory, the touch was so gentle it was almost inaudible, a mere whisper of a note that somehow commanded the absolute, undivided attention of every person in the room. The slow, melancholic opening of Chopin's ballad emerged not as notes on a page, but as dawn breaking over a still, dark lake. Single notes, impossibly clear and precise, each one placed with the delicacy of a watchmaker and the profound confidence of a master. Leo's left hand joined in, laying down a foundation of soft, resonant bass notes that seemed to make the very marble under their feet vibrate in sympathetic harmony. Across the room, smirks began to falter. Isabella's eyebrows drew together in a flicker of confusion. This wasn't the clumsy, hesitant fumbling she had orchestrated. The notes were clean, the rhythm perfect, the touch refined. But surely he would crash and burn when the piece became more demanding. By measure 8, Leo's entire being had transformed. His shoulders, once tense, relaxed into the deep muscle memory forged by 10,000 hours of solitary practice. His wrists floated above the keys with the fluid grace of a conductor guiding an unseen orchestra. The timid, invisible janitor had been utterly consumed by an artist whose presence now filled the vast ballroom like a rising tide. Dr. Finch's champagne glass paused halfway to his lips. "My God," he murmured to the senator, that's actually quite sophisticated." In the back, a European count, a renowned patron of the arts who owned a collection of rare Stradivarius instruments, leaned forward, his expression one of dawning, incredulous recognition. "The phrasing," he whispered to his wife. "Listen to that phrasing. It's perfect." Measure 16 arrived, and with it, the melody's first true, heartbreaking bloom. Leo's right hand didn't just play the notes, it sang them. His left hand provided a rich, complex counterpoint, creating a breathtaking dialogue between two distinct voices that seemed to emanate not from the piano, but from the depths of his own soul. The music wasn't being played. It was being bled. The comment feed on Amelia Vance's live stream, which had been full of mocking emojis, suddenly shifted. "Wait, is this for real? Who is this guy? This is actually good?" Senator Morrison slowly lowered his phone. His wife gripped his arm, her painted nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "David," she whispered, her voice tight with shock, "he's not just good. He's extraordinary." Then, the transition to the B section arrived like a thunderclap wrapped in velvet. Leo's full, formidable technique was unleashed. His hands became a blur of controlled power. Thundering octaves rang out like cathedral bells. Arpeggios cascaded down the keyboard like a furious waterfall. Chromatic runs executed with a speed and clarity that seemed to defy the laws of physics. His face was a canvas for the music's emotional journey. Tender and melancholic during the lyrical passages, fierce and defiant during the dramatic climaxes. "Jesus Christ," someone in the crowd whispered, the profanity an involuntary prayer of awe. "He's a concert pianist." "Shh," came a sharp reply from a dozen people at once. The audience was no longer watching a janitor. They were witnessing a master. They were not witnessing a humiliation. They were experiencing a revelation. Isabella's arctic blue eyes were wide now, her carefully constructed composure beginning to fracture. He was navigating passages that would challenge Juilliard graduates, playing with a fire and a precision that was simply impossible. His left hand thundered through the bass octaves with the power of a full orchestra, while his right hand danced through the treble with the lightness of a bird in flight. The sound filled every inch of the ballroom, a majestic, overwhelming force that resonated in their very bones. A young tech CEO, a data prodigy who measured the world in algorithms, frantically Googled the piece on his phone. His face went pale as he read the description aloud to his friends. Considered one of the most challenging and profound works in the standard piano repertoire, requires virtuoso-level technical skill and deep musical maturity, a benchmark for professional pianists at the highest level. The crowd began to murmur in stunned amazement. These titans, who collected art as an investment and measured success in stock prices, were realizing they were in the presence of something authentic, something their vast fortunes could not buy. Leo took risks, playing with the tempo and dynamics in ways that only a true artist, deeply comfortable in their mastery, would dare. He stretched lyrical phrases until they were almost at the breaking point, extracting every last drop of emotion, then accelerated into passages of technical fireworks that left the audience breathless. The European Count turned to his wife, his eyes glistening with tears. "Maria," he whispered, his voice trembling. "This is what we heard in Vienna. This is that level of artistry. Who is this man?" Isabella's hand, the one not gripping her clutch, trembled almost imperceptibly. This wasn't possible. This defied the fundamental laws of her universe. Janitors did not play Chopin like this. The working class did not possess this kind of soul, this kind of culture. Everything she believed about breeding, about hierarchy, about the very structure of the world, was being systematically dismantled by each perfectly executed note. The music built towards its ferocious, iconic climax. Leo's entire body was now one with the instrument. His feet worked the pedals with the finesse of a master weaver, creating rich layers of sound and color. He was no longer playing the piano. He had become a conduit, a channel through which the tormented, passionate genius of Frédéric Chopin flowed directly into the heart of 21st century New York. Amelia Vance's phone was shaking in her hand. The live stream had exploded to over 100,000 viewers. The comments were flying too fast to read. "I am literally crying. Who is this man? A legend is born. Isabella Hawthorne is cancelled." Then came the coda, the final, brutal, technically terrifying passage where even professionals often held back. Leo did the opposite. He leaned in, his hands separated, the left laying down a foundation of thunderous, earth-shaking chords, while the right exploded into a final, breathtaking cascade of notes that seemed to defy the limits of human anatomy. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. Isabella's mouth had fallen slightly open, a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He was playing passages her own world-renowned piano teacher had dismissed as impossible for anyone but a handful of living legends. His fingers were a blur, a hummingbird's wings, yet every single note rang out with crystalline clarity and ferocious intent. The Fazioli wasn't just being played, it was singing, screaming, roaring under his touch, its magnificent voice soaring above the stunned, reverent silence of Manhattan's elite. The final, crashing chords rang out like a declaration of war, a war against assumption, against prejudice, against a world that judges a man by his uniform instead of his soul. Leo held the final chord, letting the sustain pedal hold the notes as they hung in the air, a shimmering, defiant harmony that slowly, beautifully, decayed into nothing. Silence. A complete, absolute, profound silence that stretched for 4, 5, 6 seconds. A silence so deep you could hear the blood pounding in your own ears. It was the silence of a world being remade. And then, the eruption. The standing ovation began with the European Count. The nobleman, whose family had patronized Mozart, shot to his feet as if struck by lightning. His weathered hands, which had applauded Horowitz at Carnegie Hall and Rubinstein in Paris, came together in a thunderous, explosive clap. "Bravo!" he roared, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated emotion. "Magnifico! Assolutamente magnifico!" The applause spread through the ballroom like a flash fire. Dr. Finch was on his feet, his champagne forgotten. Senator Morrison's wife was openly weeping, dabbing her eyes with a Hermes scarf. The tech executives, the data-driven titans, were applauding with a wild, cathartic fervor, moved by a power that no algorithm could ever quantify. "Extraordinary," Dr. Finch shouted over the din. "Simply unbelievable." Amelia Vance's phone was practically vibrating out of her hand. Her live stream had exploded to 250,000 viewers. The comments were a tidal wave of pure emotion. "I'm sobbing. This man is a genius." Victoria Hawthorne just got publicly executed. Crown this king. The director of Lincoln Center, who had been attending as Isabella's guest, was already pushing his way through the stunned crowd toward the stage. His face wore the ecstatic, dumbfounded expression of a man who had just stumbled upon the mother lode. "Sir," he called out, his voice carrying over the applause, "I don't know who you are, but you belong on the world's greatest stages, not cleaning them." The crowd roared its agreement. Business cards began appearing from tuxedo pockets as talent scouts and record label executives realized they were witnessing the birth of a legend. Someone shouted, "Give this man a recording contract." Another voice yelled, "He needs to be at Carnegie Hall now." Through it all, Isabella Hawthorne stood frozen beside the piano, a statue carved from ice and public humiliation. Her face was a canvas of warring emotions, disbelief melting into embarrassment, embarrassment hardening into cold, calculating rage. The master puppeteer, who had so carefully orchestrated the evening's entertainment, had just become its most spectacular casualty. Her Arctic eyes darted around the ballroom, searching for an escape route from the smoldering wreckage of her own making. Her entourage had vanished. James was frantically texting on his phone, already in damage control mode. Dr. Finch was cheering for Leo. Even Amelia, her own publicist, was focused solely on capturing the crowd's ecstatic reaction, documenting her employer's downfall for the world to see. The 10-carat canary diamond ring still sat on the piano's music stand, a glittering monument to her catastrophic miscalculation. Leo remained seated at the piano bench, his chest rising and falling with the exertion of his performance. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his expression was one of quiet, profound vindication. He slowly, gracefully, rose to his feet. His simple black uniform, which moments ago had been a symbol of his station, now seemed like the stark, minimalist costume of an avenging angel. The applause intensified as he stood, a deafening wave of celebration. For 7 years, Leo Martinez had been a ghost in this world. Now, he was the only thing in it they could see. He turned to face Isabella directly, his warm brown eyes meeting her ice-blue gaze with a steady, unbreakable confidence. The janitor she had tried to break had been replaced by an artist who now knew his own infinite worth. "Ms. Hawthorne," Leo said, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom as the applause momentarily subsided. "I believe you have a wedding to plan." He gestured with an elegant, almost casual flick of his wrist towards the absurdly large diamond ring. "Should I clear my calendar?" The ballroom didn't just laugh, it howled. A fresh wave of applause and appreciative whistles erupted. Someone shouted, "Checkmate!" Isabella's face, already pale, flushed a deep, ugly crimson. Her mouth opened, then closed, no sound emerging. A billionaire, rendered utterly speechless by a janitor's quiet dignity. Leo calmly walked back to where he had left his work gloves beside the piano bench. With a deliberate, almost ceremonial grace, he picked them up and placed them on the music stand, right next to Isabella's glittering diamond. The contrast was a work of art in itself. The worn, calloused leather of honest labor beside the cold, flawless fire of inherited privilege. "The pleasure," he said softly, his voice for her alone, "was all mine." The power dynamic of the entire evening had not just shifted. It had been violently, seismically, and irrevocably reversed. Isabella Hawthorne, who had commanded every room she entered her entire life, was now a ghost at her own party. The spotlight that had been her birthright now belonged to the man she had tried, and failed, to extinguish, and every single phone in the room had recorded his coronation, and her spectacular fall from grace, for all of posterity. The applause showed no signs of stopping. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been judged by your job or your clothes, smash that like button right now for Leo. Let's show the world what true worth looks like. The applause continued to swell, a thunderous ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Olympus Club. Manhattan's elite were not just clapping for a piano performance. They were clapping for the raw, visceral thrill of watching their own rigid hierarchies be torn down by a force they could not comprehend. Pure, undeniable talent. Count D'Amico, the European aristocrat, finally reached the stage, his eyes bright with the fervor of a true believer. "Maestro," he said, grasping Leo's hand with both of his own, his voice thick with emotion. "In 60 years of attending the world's finest concert halls, I have seldom heard Chopin played with such soul. You must tell me, where did you study?" Before Leo could answer, Thomas Berkowitz, the director of Lincoln Center, was at his side, a business card extended like a sacrament. "We need to talk, immediately. I'm thinking a debut recital, a recording deal with our in-house label. This is a once-in-a-generation talent." Suddenly, Leo was surrounded. Business cards materialized from all directions. A sleek, sharp-suited woman from Deutsche Grammophon, a legendary agent who represented the world's top classical musicians. Patrons of the arts, their checkbooks practically trembling in their pockets, all vying for a piece of the man they had been ignoring moments before. Amelia Vance's phone had become the epicenter of a global media earthquake. The livestream now had over 500,000 concurrent viewers and was climbing exponentially. The hashtag #JanitorGenius was the #1 trend worldwide, eclipsing every other news story. The comments were a torrent of digital apotheosis. "This man is a national treasure. Isabella Hawthorne just created a superstar. I can't stop crying." Talent has no zip code. But the most important moment came from the service entrance. Elijah Jones, the Lincoln Center security guard, stood in the doorway. He'd been on his break, scrolling through his phone, when he saw Leo's face trending. He had run the 10 blocks from Lincoln Center to Fifth Avenue. Now he stood there, his security guard uniform a stark contrast to the couture gowns and bespoke suits, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Leo," he called out, his voice choked with pride. I told you those hands weren't made for mops." The crowd parted, watching as Elijah made his way to the stage. The two men, the janitor and the security guard, embraced in the center of the glittering ballroom. In that moment, they were not service workers. They were brothers, artists, survivors. "Elijah is the reason I'm here," Leo announced to the hushed crowd, his arms still around the older man's shoulders. "He gave me a place to practice when the world gave me no place to dream." The applause, impossibly, grew even louder, now directed at Elijah, the quiet enabler, the accidental hero of the story. Isabella Hawthorne watched this scene from her gilded cage beside the piano, her world imploding in real time. Her phone was buzzing incessantly. The Hawthorne global stock price was already plummeting in after-hours trading as the viral disaster unfolded. Board members were demanding an immediate explanation. Then, a new voice cut through the noise. Harrison Croft, the CEO of a rival pharmaceutical company and Isabella's primary business antagonist, stepped forward, a shark's smile playing on his lips. "A fascinating evening, Isabella. Truly inspiring. In fact, in your honor, my company is establishing a $50 million scholarship fund for overlooked artists from working-class backgrounds. We'll call it the Hawthorne Second Chance Foundation." A wave of enthusiastic applause greeted this announcement. Isabella's face went ashen. Her act of cruelty was being weaponized against her, transformed into her competitor's philanthropic triumph. $100 million, announced a tech billionaire, not to be outdone. "Full-ride scholarships, because clearly we've been looking for genius in all the wrong places." Within 5 minutes, over $300 million in arts funding had been pledged, a tidal wave of charitable one-upmanship, all sparked by one man's refusal to be humiliated. Leo's own phone, which had been silent in his pocket, began to vibrate so intensely it felt like it might combust. A GoFundMe page for his mother's surgery, started by an anonymous viewer of the live stream, had already surpassed its goal, crossing the $100,000 mark in less than 20 minutes. "Leo." A voice, breathless and familiar, cut through the din. Sophia burst through the ballroom's main doors, still in her Columbia University sweatshirt, her face a mask of frantic disbelief. She had seen her brother trending on Twitter and had sprinted from her dorm room. "What the hell is happening? You're everywhere." She rushed to him, and he held her tight. "Mom's watching on a nurse's phone from the hospital," she whispered into his ear. "She's crying. Happy tears. The hospital administrator already called her room. Some anonymous donor wired the full amount for the treatment. All of it." Leo's composure, the iron will that had carried him through 7 years of struggle, finally cracked. The weight of it all, the grief, the sacrifice, the rage, the hope, came pouring out in a single silent tear that traced a path through the grime on his cheek. Thomas Berkowitz from Lincoln Center gently touched his arm. "Mr. Martinez, on behalf of the board, I would like to offer you the position of artist in residence, effective immediately, full salary, benefits, a housing stipend, and complete creative freedom." Leo looked around the ballroom at the sea of faces that had, in the span of 10 minutes, transformed from a lynch mob into a congregation of worshippers. He looked at Isabella Hawthorne, standing alone, a billionaire rendered utterly irrelevant by her own hubris. He looked at the piano, the beautiful instrument that had been his weapon and his salvation. "I'll finish my shift first," Leo said quietly. "But yes, I accept." 3 months later, Leo Martinez walked onto the main stage at Carnegie Hall. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but on his wrist, catching the warm glow of the spotlight, was his father's simple golden Seiko watch. The sold-out audience rose to its feet as he approached the Fazioli concert grand that waited for him like an old friend. In the front row sat his mother, radiant and healthy, her hand held by Sophia, who was thriving in her dual degree program at Columbia. Next to them sat Elijah Jones, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief, looking more at home in his new suit than any billionaire ever could. Isabella Hawthorne was not there. Her empire had crumbled under the weight of the scandal and the subsequent investigations into Hawthorne Global's predatory pricing. The board had forced her out. She had retreated to her estate in the Hamptons, a prisoner in a palace of her own making, where a priceless piano sat under a dust cover, a silent monument to the profound danger of underestimating another human being. As Leo's fingers touched the keys to begin his program, with Chopin's Ballad No. 1, of course, he thought about the journey. Every mop stroke, every toilet scrubbed, Every midnight hour in that dusty practice room had been a note in the symphony of his life, a symphony that had finally reached its crescendo. The music that filled the hallowed hall wasn't just technically perfect. It was a prayer made audible, dignity given a voice, proof that the most beautiful things often grow in the hardest soil. When the final notes faded into a reverent, breathless silence, Leo stood to accept an ovation that seemed to shake the city. But his mind wasn't on the applause. It was on a simple, profound truth. They can take your job, they can take your money, they can try to take your dreams, but they can never take what is divinely placed in your soul. We live in a world that is obsessed with covers, job titles, zip codes, bank statements. We judge books by them every single day. But genius doesn't wear a uniform. Talent doesn't carry a designer handbag. How many Leos do you walk past every day, invisible, unheard? How many times have you been Leo, underestimated, overlooked, written off? And here's the harder question. When was the last time you were Isabella? When did you make an assumption based on appearances? When did you miss the brilliance standing right in front of you because it wasn't packaged the way you expected? Excellence is everywhere. The only question is whether we have the eyes to see it and the heart to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that prove the most extraordinary people often come in the most ordinary packages, because every single one of us deserves our Carnegie Hall moment. Even you.